73 years alone. An entire steam locomotive, abandoned in the Nevada desert, left to the sand with no record and no explanation. How does a machine built to power the West just vanish from history, still intact but forgotten? This isn't ordinary neglect. Most retired engines were scrapped, not left as ghostly relics on sun-baked spurs. Unraveling how such power became a silent mystery leads into a story of lost ambition, corporate decisions, and the fragile line between progress and oblivion. But can we truly piece together why it was left behind and what should become of it now? Metal tells its own story, even when the records have vanished. On the locomotive's battered frame, a fragment of cast iron clings to the smokebox, showing 4 digits, 72 the last character lost to corrosion. This single clue becomes the starting point for unraveling the engine's identity. No company name remains, no builder's badge in full, yet the fragment's shape and font match builder plates used by Baldwin and Alco in the early 20th century. The next step is measurement. Using calibrated photographs, researchers compare the wheelbase and rivet grid to historic catalogs. The locomotive's wheel arrangement, 2 leading wheels, 8 driving wheels, 2 trailing, forms the classic 282 Mikado profile, a design favored for heavy freight work on Western railroads from 1910 through the 1940s. Each wheel's diameter, measured against the standard gauge track, matches the Baldwin 63-inch driver pattern. The spacing between rivets on the boiler shell, visible even through decades of rust, follows a rectangular grid seen in Baldwin's 1915 to 1925 production runs. Baldwin's signature was a squared-off rivet, while Alco preferred rounded. Here the rivets are squared, reinforcing the Baldwin hypothesis. The placement and size of the sand domes, the curve of the firebox, and the profile of the cab windows all point to a late-era Mikado, likely built between 1915 and 1925. A close look at the running gear reveals more. The side rods and valve gear match the wall shirts pattern common on Baldwin's heavy freight engines. The tender, half buried in sand, still shows the outline of its original water capacity, about 10,000 gallons, based on the spacing of the fill hatches and the length of the tank. Even the spacing of the bolts along the frame aligns with drawings from Baldwin's Nevada deliveries. The partial builder's plate, the wheel arrangement, and the rivet grid together fix the locomotive's class as a Baldwin 282, most likely from a batch delivered to Western lines during the mining boom. This forensic process, reading metal, counting rivets, matching dimensions, provides a rock-solid identification, even as the desert tries to erase every trace. The technical evidence narrows the engine's identity to a handful of possible serial numbers, setting the stage for the next step, tracing which railroad ordered it and why it was left to face 73 years of silence and sand. In January 1947, a purchase contract landed on the desk of Union Pacific's mechanical division. The order called for a new steam locomotive, one capable of delivering 3,000 horsepower, with an enlarged tender for the punishing stretches between water stops in Nevada. This was not a routine acquisition. The railroad's procurement note, stamped with urgency, outlined a machine meant to dominate the San Luis Hernando to Salt Lake City corridor, a 600-mile artery of ore, salt, and high-value passengers. The engine's specifications went beyond the usual: an overall length of 90 feet, a tender holding 12,000 gallons of water and 20,000 gallons of fuel oil, and a design tailored for the relentless grades and isolation of the Great Basin. Union Pacific's reasoning was clear. The post-war mining boom was in full swing, with copper and silver flowing out of Nevada's interior at record rates. Older Pacific-type engines, built for lighter loads and shorter runs, were straining to keep up. Company engineers calculated that a locomotive with this much power could haul 45,000 ton-miles of ore per week, slashing transit times and reducing the need for double-heading on the steepest grades. The procurement note even referenced the need for a high-output Pacific to serve the Salt Lake to Nevada desert segment, justifying the $275,000 price tag, an immense sum for a single engine and tender. The contract excerpt preserved in Union Pacific's mechanical department files lays out the mission in dry, bureaucratic language. Locomotive and tender to be constructed for continuous service between Salt Lake City and Mojave, with minimum water stops, maximum tonnage, and all-weather reliability. The enlarged tender was not a luxury but a necessity, as water sources along the line were scarce and unreliable. Every design choice reflected the realities of running heavy freight and first-class passenger trains across a region where a broken-down engine could mean hours, even days, of delay. This was more than an engineering challenge. It was an economic calculation shaped by the demands of Nevada's mid-century mining economy and the railroad's drive for efficiency. The locomotive was expected to move not just metal and minerals, but also the fortunes of entire towns along its route. Each mile logged, an average of $1,200 per month in the early years, meant jobs, shipments, and payrolls that rippled out from the rails into the fabric of the West. Union Pacific acted as both customer and architect, specifying every detail down to the Walschaerts valve gear and the arrangement of cab instruments. The engine's debut in early 1948 was met with little fanfare, but its presence on the Nevada main line signaled a new era of scale and ambition. For a time, it fulfilled its mandate exactly as intended, bridging distances, feeding the mills, and binding the region to the national economy. Its story, however, was always shaped by the larger tides of technology and commerce, a story that would soon turn as abruptly as it began. Each dawn on the Tonopah Goldfield line, the locomotive's firebox would roar to life, casting a warm glow over the cinders and frost. Crews gathered in the pre-dawn chill, shoveling coal and checking water levels, their breath mingling with the first wisps of steam. The engineer, often a veteran of the mining runs, would thumb through the waybills, stacked high with orders for ore, timber, and livestock. One logbook entry from April 1922 reads, "Departed Goldfield 4:16 a.m., 40 cars ore, 8 cars timber, 2 passenger cars, all on schedule." The engine's daily burden was immense. A full load meant 40 cars, each packed with copper and silver pulled from the earth, stretching the train to nearly half a mile. On steep grades west of Goldfield, the fireman would stoke the boiler furiously, sweat running down his face even as snow piled against the cab windows. The locomotive's whistle signaled its approach long before it reached Beatty or Rhyolite, a sound that meant paychecks, supplies, and news from the outside world. Anecdotes from the crew bring the machine's working life into sharper focus. Fireman Tom Kelly remembered the winter of 1935, when a flash flood washed out the track near Bullfrog. The train sat stranded for 2 days, the engine's heat keeping the crew alive while they waited for help. Engineer Sam Dorsey, who ran the line from 1927 to 1946, described the rhythm of the work. You learned every curve by heart. The engine talked to you, groans on the uphill, a sigh when she crested the pass. She would let you know if you pushed too hard. Wear came quickly. Every 12,000 miles, the locomotive rolled into the Ely shops for a full overhaul, boiler washed, bearings replaced, running gear checked inch by inch. Shop records from 1948 describe a major incident, a broken side rod outside Tonopah, repaired on the spot with spare parts and grit. Each overhaul was logged, the signatures of engineers and mechanics marking the machine's passage through time. The locomotive's presence rippled through the region. Ore shipments fed the mills, keeping hundreds employed. Timber runs supplied the mines and new settlements, while the occasional passenger car carried miners' families and mail. The engine's reliability meant towns thrived or withered depending on its performance. In peak years, it logged over 20,000 miles, enough to circle the globe nearly once. By the late 1940s, the pace slowed. New diesel engines appeared on the horizon, promising fewer breakdowns and lower costs. But for decades, this locomotive remained the backbone of Nevada's ore lines, its steel heart pounding out the rhythm of an era now vanished. In the spring of 1949, a slim folder labeled Fuel Cost Analysis, Nevada Division landed on the desk of Union Pacific's chief mechanical officer. The numbers inside told a story more final than any accident or derailment. Diesel locomotives, now rolling out of EMD's LaGrange plant, could move a ton of freight across Nevada for nearly a third less than steam. The latest comparison showed a 32% savings on fuel alone. Maintenance hours dropped even further, with diesel units needing only a fraction of the shop time that steam demanded. A separate sheet, stamped May 1950, outlined the fate of every steam engine on the division's books. Each entry carried a cold calculation: operating cost per mile, average miles between failures, projected scrap value. The locomotive in question, once the pride of the Tonopah Goldfield line, appeared near the bottom. Its annual outlay for fuel, water, and labor dwarfed that of the new diesels by thousands of dollars. The cost-benefit line, drawn in red pencil, left little room for sentiment. A second memo, signed by the division's finance officer, recommended immediate retirement. The language was terse. Unit number 725 was to be dropped from the active roster. Disposition: abandon in place. Spur 14. No provision for transfer, no plan for museum donation, just a simple order to remove the engine from the company's asset ledger. The notation Spur 14 pointed to a remote siding already slated for closure, miles from the nearest town or mainline connection. The decision was not an isolated one. Across the West, similar sheets were filled out every month as railroads rushed to modernize. The economics left little room for nostalgia. Hauling a 250-ton locomotive to a distant scrapyard would have cost more than the price fetched for its metal. Instead, the company opted for abandonment, a choice that made financial sense on paper, even if it meant leaving a massive machine to the elements. The final act was bureaucratic, not dramatic. On May 18, 1950, a clerk typed up the retirement notice and filed it with the Asset Management Office. The engine's logbook ended with a single line: retired, not to be moved. With that, the locomotive was erased from payroll and memory, its future determined by a handful of numbers and a signature. No ceremony marked the end. The crew who last ran her west out of Goldfield never returned. The rails on Spur 14 would soon be torn up, the siding erased from maps, and the engine left to face the desert alone. For decades, the paperwork gathered dust in a file drawer, while the locomotive itself settled deeper into sand and silence, locked by a calculation that valued efficiency over remembrance. Wind and time have left their signatures on every inch of the locomotive's steel. Out here, the desert is not a passive backdrop, but a relentless sculptor, shaping and erasing in equal measure. Each summer, temperatures soar past 105 degrees before plunging below freezing on winter nights, a swing of more than 80 degrees in a single day. Metal expands and contracts, rivets loosen, and seams crack along invisible fault lines. NOAA's long-term climate records for this region confirm the violence of these cycles. More than 70 years of daily extremes, each one a subtle blow to the engine's frame. Sandstorms arrive without warning. Driven by winds that can top 40 miles an hour, fine grains scour the boiler shell and running gear, stripping away paint and exposing bare steel. Over decades, this sand acts as both destroyer and preserver. It abrades the edges of the wheels, smooths sharp corners, and wears down raised lettering until only the faintest outlines remain. Yet the same sand, swirling and settling, sometimes buries the lower frame, shielding it from further attack. NOAA's desert corrosion models estimate a loss of 0.2 millimeters of steel each year, a slow but steady erasure that adds up to more than a centimeter of vanished metal since abandonment. Flash floods, rare but fierce, leave their mark in a different way. Water pools around the firebox, seeping into cracks and triggering bursts of rust that pit the surface. When the water retreats, silt and gravel settle in the hollows, creating pockets where corrosion accelerates. The wooden cab and trim surrendered first, splintered, warped, then vanished entirely. Only the iron and steel endure, battered but still recognizable, a testament to both human engineering and the desert's indifferent patience. 73 years of exposure have transformed the locomotive from a machine of movement into a monument of stillness. Its surfaces are pitted, its colors faded to the memory of gray and red, but the form remains. In this harsh environment, decay is not sudden or total. It is a slow negotiation between metal and sand, heat and cold, each season leaving its own signature on the silent giant. On April 14, 2023, a GPS signal from the Nevada desert marked the start of a new chapter for a long-lost locomotive. Mark Henderson, an amateur rail enthusiast, logged the coordinates: 38.8959 north, 115.2254 west, after stumbling across a massive rusted engine half buried at the edge of a forgotten siding. The Bureau of Land Management responded quickly, opening case NV 2023-0412 at the Ely Field Office. Their initial questions were practical, about ownership, safety, and next steps. A site inspection confirmed the find's rarity. The builder's plate, though scarred by time, matched Alco's 1941 serial records. Unlike the gutted shells scattered across the West, this locomotive remained largely intact. Linda Reyes, the Bureau of Land Management's cultural resource officer, called it virtually unique in American rail heritage. The phrase spread, sparking interest from preservationists and the press alike. Ownership was murky. The Bureau of Land Management contacted the Nevada State Railroad Museum and Union Pacific Heritage Division. Both saw potential and risk. Dr. Evelyn Hart, the museum's curator, advocated for full restoration and relocation, estimating $2.3 million for conservation and transport. Local preservationists proposed a more modest plan to stabilize the engine where it stood, add a shelter, and install interpretive signage with a projected cost of $350,000 and hopes for public grants. At a packed Beatty Town Hall, residents debated the locomotive's fate. Some saw a tourist attraction, others feared environmental disruption. Union Pacific's audit found no active claim. The Bureau of Land Management's budget outlined 3 options: full restoration, relocation, or in situ preservation. Each path carried its own costs, legal questions, and a different vision for what history should be saved and at what price. Today, the locomotive remains alone, a rare survivor when most were melted down within years of dieselization. Its ghostly presence asks if we are willing to confront what progress leaves behind. In a nation that built its future on forgetting, preservation becomes a choice about which stories endure. The desert keeps its secrets, but what we choose to rescue reveals what we value now. What would you decide for its fate?